We'll get into a study of Philippians chapter 1, verse 27 through 30. I started the last sermon with Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, which I just want to repeat because this, I think, gives kind of the context of what I'm trying to talk about. Therefore, I exhort you, brothers, through the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. And this translation says, which is your reasonable service. But I believe true worship is a better translation of it, and a number of translations do translate it that way. So do not be conformed to this age, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind. In other words, be transformed by the changing of your thinking. And that's really, to a large extent, what Christianity is all about. How to change our thinking so that we think the way God wants us to think. And everything else in our life that's good will flow from that. And what we are to transform it to, so that you may approve what is the good and well-pleasing and perfect will of God. So we need to transform our thinking from our old way of thinking to the way God wants us to think, which we see most of all in the life of Jesus himself. Okay, we looked at maybe the first point in Philippians chapter 1 and verse 27, and to me this is a big part of this process of being transformed by changing our thinking. Largely, this passage is about being brave in our thinking. The first point, he makes a number of points, but the overall point is he says to lead your life in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ. And to me, that's what the rest of this passage is about. How do we live in a way that makes us worthy to be Christians? And by that, he doesn't mean perfect, but he means live our life in a way that brings glory and respect to God. So only lead your lives in a manner worthy of the gospel of Christ, so that whether I come and see you or am absent, I hear of your circumstances. You are standing firm in one spirit, with one soul, contending side by side for the faith of the gospel. And then verse 28, and not letting yourselves be intimidated in anything by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction to you. Which is a sign of destruction to them, but of your salvation. And this from God. In verse 29 and 30, because to you has been graciously granted on behalf of Christ, not only to believe in him, but also to suffer on behalf of him, having the same struggle which you see in me and now hear about in me. There's kind of three sections to this passage. The overall point is to live in a manner worthy, but really I think that the context of it is standing up for Christ no matter what. Probably does have persecution in mind as the background to why he wrote this passage. There's really three main points that he makes in terms of living in a way that's worthy of being a Christian. The first one is 27a. I'm going to miss out the worthy part. We covered that pretty good last time. The first part I want to look at, I've called it Worthiness 1, and I know I've spelled worthiness wrong, so don't bother telling me I've spelled it wrong. I realised that after I printed it out. Okay, so Philippians 1:27b, that you stand firm in one spirit with one soul, contending side by side for the faith of the gospel. One thing I do know is when a group of people is under pressure for various reasons, we sometimes turn on each other. And this does happen. I've seen it in a number of cases. Even occasionally a husband and wife, if they're under severe pressure, they start looking at each other in a different way, thinking maybe they can avoid the pressure if they're not associated with this person or something like that. But that's not an uncommon thing. So with a background of persecution in this case, it was especially important that Paul emphasized the need to absolutely maintain the unity of the congregation. As soon as individual members start turning against each other, it spells doom for the congregation. If you don't do something about it, it spells doom for the congregation. And again, I've seen that over and over again. So I want to just touch on this idea a little bit. It said, stand firm in one spirit. The one spirit there is really all have a constant faith in Jesus and a belief in Jesus and a belief of what we're doing is right. There's nothing miraculous about the point he's making here. And with one soul, in other words, your full intention is to maintain the unity of the Spirit to a large extent, no matter what. And then he says, contending side by side for the faith of the gospel. So here he's really emphasized the really essential need for us to do everything we can to maintain the unity of the body and of the congregation especially. Certainly this applies to those outside of the congregation, but especially he's referring to the congregation itself. Let's just look at a few verses that relate to that, and especially in 1 Corinthians 12. So starting in verse 12, for just as the body is one and has many members, but all the members of the body, although they are many, are one body, thus also Christ. Even though we are all different individual members with different personalities, different characteristics, different likes and dislikes, and yet, in the spiritual sense, we are one body, the same as Jesus had one body, is one body. So no matter the fact that we are different people, and yet we're all part of that same body. So the body here is not the physical body, it's the spiritual body, the Christian body, if you like. And especially it's talking about the individual congregation. That is one. We as individuals make up that one. And then in verse 18 and 19, but now God has placed the members, each one of them, in the body, just as he wanted. And that's, I think, a pretty neat statement. Even though we're all different, God put us here because he wanted us here. Don't you like being wanted? You know, it's not a nice thing when people don't want you. I often get the feeling when I'm talking to someone, they don't really want to be talking to me. I don't know why. Maybe it's an inbuilt problem I've got. It's true or false, I don't know. I was talking to a few people the other day, and didn't take too long, and they say, oh yeah, I must mingle and talk to someone else. Happened more than once. And I think, hello, what about? I thought I was being interesting, you know. But to be wanted, and especially by God, surely that's an incredible thing. Even when we are not liked, maybe, because we're all human and we sometimes don't like each other, and yet God put us here, not so that we would like them, but because he wanted us here. We are wanted by God. And to me, that's a fabulous reason to do everything we can to maintain the unity of the Spirit. And if you like, to love each other within the body. And verse 19, and if they all were one member, where would the body be? If we all separated, we all were just individuals, the body wouldn't exist, couldn't exist, because we'd all be doing our own thing. But now there are many members, but one body. So he said, contending side by side for the faith of the gospel. And then 24 and 25. And again, this I used to take a lot of comfort in this. Maybe don't worry about it so much, but early on as a Christian, I took a lot of comfort from this passage. But our presentable parts do not have need of this. So the presentable people, the people that naturally attract attention, if you like, have no need of this special effort. Yet God composed the body by giving more abundant honour to the part which lacked it, which lacked presentability. You know, if you've got the swish hairdo and the handsome face and lots of money and flash cars and, you know, you attract attention. People like you if you're a good talker. But there are a lot of people that aren't like that. What about those in the church? Do we form these hierarchies in the church? Unfortunately, very often we do. Should we form them? Should we have a group of people that are the in crowd in church? And should we have a group of people who really feel like they're there only because other people let them come? Unfortunately, that happens more often than So we need these lessons regularly to help us understand that all of us are necessary in the body of Christ. All of us are important in the body of Christ. And the reason is, in order that there be no division in the body, but the members would have the same concern for one another. And I think it goes both ways. The unpresentable members should have the same concern for the presentable members. The presentable members should have the same concern for the unpresentable members. Okay, and then verse, and I'll just quickly touch on this. I don't want to spend too much time on it. 1 Corinthians 1:10 through 13. Paul's concern here is that there's the congregation here is divided up into groups. Go down to verse 11. For it has been made clear to me concerning you, my brothers, by Chloe's people, that's where he got the message from, that there are quarrels among you, there are disagreements among you. But I say this, that each of you is saying, I am with Paul, I am with Apollos, I am with Cephas, and I am with Christ. So they're divided up into all these different groups. In fact, I think what it should be is all are with Christ. And yet some says, no, I'm following Paul's particular brand, I'm following Apollos' particular brand. And the arguments against this is, has Christ been divided? If we divide up into these groups, and you've got the important group and the unimportant group, and we're not working together to accomplish the same goals, has Christ been divided? If Christ was divided into different groups, then we have the right to do this. But he doesn't, he's one. Was Paul crucified for you? The greatest man as Paul was, he couldn't save anybody. Only Jesus saves us really in the overall tenor of things. He may be able to lead others to salvation, but he couldn't save them. He couldn't be baptized for them. So if we've got to follow John Calvin's brand of Christianity, if you like, John Calvin can't do anything for us. He can't save us. He can't die for us. He can't have our sins forgiven. Only Jesus can do that. Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? Okay, I think this particular passage does apply to what we have in Christianity today, and that we've got all the different groups. They've got, in many cases, their own particular way of being saved. They've got their own headquarters. They've got their own ways of doing things. They've got their own organisations. I think this does apply to that, and that's wrong. But more than anything, I think Paul is addressing the congregation itself. We all need to be 100% united, really encouraging each other to the very best of our ability, making each other feel welcome within the congregation, no matter who we are. I think kind of what I get out of this is that it's up to each one of us as individuals, no matter where you see yourself as part of a congregation. It's up to each one of us to make sure you do your part for the unity of the congregation. Maybe you're one of the ones that's a bit provocative, and you like getting in arguments with people. I used to be like that as a Christian. I loved getting a religious argument with someone. But that's not necessarily the right way to promote unity. If I can see that that's not helping the unity of the situation, even though I may enjoy it very much, I should change and start relating to people in a way that's more encouraging. So no matter what our situation is, we are responsible to Christ to do everything we can to promote the unity of the congregation. Now, I don't believe that means we can never leave a congregation because we disagree with it. I think I only left one congregation, well, maybe two, depends how you look at it, because I simply disagreed with what they were teaching and doing. We can go to another congregation because we want to start another congregation. We could go to a congregation because we find that particular congregation maybe more encouraging, more fulfilling. We feel like we can play our part as a Christian more effectively within that congregation. What we don't have the right to do, and I think no matter what, even if we disagree with the congregation, is cause division within the congregation. And that's what this is really in the end talking about. We prevent division by being an active and a spiritual and an encouraging part of the congregation. I've left congregations rather than kicking up a big fuss and saying you're wrong and trying to get followers behind me against the other group. And that's unfortunately normally what happens. I think it probably has happened quite a lot in New Zealand. Very unfortunate. So I don't think this is saying we can never leave a congregation. But what we can't do, and what it really is emphasising, we cannot cause division within a congregation. We must be encouraging and supportive and help the congregation be 100% united. And if that requires us to change in the way we do things, I mean, as a person, I mean, we should be willing to change. If it means we need to make an effort with someone who is struggling, then we need to make that effort. Okay, the second point, worthiness, number 2. This comes from Philippians chapter 1, verse 28. And not letting yourselves be intimidated in anything by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction to them, but of your salvation, and this from God. I must admit, I think this is a really neat passage. A lot of times the reason we don't function as well as a Christian as we should is because in some way we are intimidated by someone who is or who disagrees with what we believe or what we're trying to promote. And the easiest way to avoid that problem is to just keep your mouth shut. And again, I'm not saying we should get in arguments with everyone, but we should learn to be able to talk to people to put our point. I believe we do have the truth. If someone is promoting something that is not what the Bible teaches, we have an obligation, I think, to at least try and correct them. So, not letting yourself be intimidated in anything by your opponents. Notice, by your opponents. We are going to get opposition. There's just no doubt about it. I've been a Christian since 1975. And a lot of people have disagreed with my beliefs. We are going to get opposition. We're not going to get opposition like they did in the first century. Their opposition and their intimidation, if you like, came from, to some extent, by both the Jews and the Romans who wanted to kill them. All we have in terms of opposition is people who disagree with us and don't want us to promote our views. That's a very different situation. I think we have every reason not to be intimidated. I'm glad we're not in the situation that the early Christians were in. They had it so much harder than we do. Intimidation is I've given a definition there. We all know what intimidation is. Someone's putting pressure on you and you back down because of the pressure that they're putting on you. In other words, the easiest way to circumvent that pressure is just to shut up. Or just to not to do what they were asking you to do. When I first became a Christian, I used to go to the pub regularly. I mean, before I became a Christian. For a while after becoming a Christian, I carried on going to the pub. And when I first, maybe this isn't a good illustration, I don't know, but my friends would say, what are you having to drink, John? And I'd say sarsaparilla. But that was my favourite. After I became a Christian, my favourite drink was sarsaparilla. So, and they'd sort of have a go at me for not drinking alcohol anymore. But I stuck my guns. And it didn't actually take too long before when one of them would say, what are you having to drink, John? And I said, sarsaparilla. I went to say something rather, and one of my other friends said, John will just have sarsaparilla. And I was completely accepted just drinking sarsaparilla when everyone else was drinking alcohol. In the end, I stopped going to the pub altogether, but still. But my point is, if we back down, we'll never get anyone's respect. We never will get anyone's respect. So if we allow other people to intimidate us, especially from a religious point of view, they will never respect our views. But if we're willing to stand up and say, this is what I believe, or how do we put it to try and get into reasoned discussion with them. Teaching the truth in love, not arguing to win an argument. It's teaching the truth in love. But if we can stand up for our beliefs, we have a chance of changing them. But if we keep quiet because we don't want to get in an argument, they will never respect us. We will never make any progress whatsoever. I want to give a few examples, mainly 2 examples, or maybe 3, of people in the Bible who were, if you like, in this situation. The first one I want to look at is, I've called a very old example. this is Moses. The situation was possibly Ramesses II, I'm not sure. It doesn't actually say which the Pharaoh was, but anyway, there was a new Pharaoh in town, and he decided that, to start with, he told the midwives to kill the boy children and let the girl children live. But then the midwives wouldn't do that, so they said, oh, the Hebrew women are so vigorous, they have the babies before we even get there, so we can't do that. So then he said, well, let's just go ahead and kill all the male Jewish children up to a certain age. So here, by faith, Moses, when he was born, and the faith isn't Moses so much, or it's as a result of faith, but the decision came from his parents. By faith, Moses, when he was born, was hidden for 3 months by his parents. Because they saw the child was handsome. The original idea seems to be in good condition. Not so much a beautiful baby. All beautiful is a baby according to their mother. All babies are beautiful according to their mother. But it's probably that he was whole. He had all his bits, because they saw the child was handsome, and they were not afraid of the edict of the king. And that was a big thing then. Pharaoh was absolute master. If he decided you had to die, you had to die. And yet, because of their faith in God, they were more afraid of God than they were of this king. And so they hid the baby. And then in verse 24, by faith Moses, and here it's talking about the strength and the character of Moses. By faith Moses, when he was grown up, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. And you imagine if you were born into a king's family, or became an accepted part of the king's family. I mean, all his problems would have been over. Wealth, position, authority, luxury, everything. So often we think of what's important in life. He had it all. And yet, because of his faith, he chose not to lead that life. Notice in 25, choosing instead to be mistreated with the people of God. He preferred suffering rather than to experience the transitory enjoyment of sin, which is how he described the life of being a member of the Pharaoh's household. Considering reproach endured for the sake of Christ greater wealth. Do we consider reproach for serving Christ wealth? Moses did. Greater wealth than the treasures of Egypt, for he was looking to the reward. By faith he left Egypt, not fearing the anger of the king, for he persevered as if he saw the invisible one. You can see what was important and what had value as far as Moses was concerned. Now, we tend to read the Old Testament and we think of them, and the New really, as we think of these great people as superhumans. You look at the movies and there's so much stuff. People just seem to have magical powers. Superman, I grew up reading Superman comics, Batman, Spider-Man, Wonder Woman, all sorts of $1 Million Man, I think he approached on that. These were people they were different from us. They had something really special. We were the ones just looking to examining their lives and wishing to a large extent that we were like them. But these guys that we have, these people we're talking about in the New Testament, they were not like that. They were just human beings, very much the same as we were. The difference is, and this isn't a difference from us, they truly had faith. They truly had confidence in God. And the Bible all the way through calls that faith. These were people of faith. How can we be like these people? I think the formula is given here quite clearly. If we have that same faith, we have what Moses, what his parents, what many of these other people that the Bible talks about had. We also can be people of faith. There was nothing miraculous about these people. They were just human beings. As great as Paul was, he was no different from us. He just truly believed in God. He truly had confidence in what Jesus could do for him. He truly believed when this life was over, he would be in heaven with God. Okay, Dee's just given me the sign. It's 10 minutes, so we're not doing too bad. Okay, next example I want to look at. And I've called this an old example as against a very old example. This is move forward a bit into the New Testament times. This is Paul himself. Acts 16, he was going to a place of prayer. A certain female slave who had a servant of divination met them. She said he was the servant of the Most High God. Paul didn't like this, so he decided to exorcise the demon that was controlling her so that she didn't have anywhere, so that she could no longer do what she was doing. Drop down to verse 19. When her owners saw that their hope of profit was gone, but when their owners saw that their hope of profit was gone, they seized Paul and Silas and dragged them into the marketplace before the rulers. So Paul is doing something that's good. He's driving out this demon from this woman. He didn't want to be announced or evidence given that he was the Son of God by a demon, so he cast the demon out. The owners, their ability to make profit out of this woman's gone, so they grab Paul and Silas, take them into the marketplace. Then later on, verse 22, the crowd joined in attacking them. The chief magistrates tore off their clothes and gave orders to them to be beaten with rods. And after they had inflicted many blows on them, they threw them into prison, giving orders to the jailers to guard them securely. Having received such an order, he put them in the inner prison and fastened their feet in the stocks. I don't know about you, I could kind of think twice probably about carrying on what I was doing. After that, he's been beaten, thrown in prison, totally unjustly treated. But look what Paul does as a result. He doesn't say, well, it'll be better for me if I just keep quiet. I'm hoping God won't hold it against me, but I think I'd be better off keeping quiet, and then later on I'll be able to get out of jail somehow and I'll carry on preaching the gospel somewhere else where they don't know me. But it was about midnight. Paul and Silas, what were they doing? Praying and singing. As a result of that, the guard comes. He's going to kill himself because the doors go open. He thinks they've escaped, so the guard's going to kill himself. But Paul preaches the gospel to him instead, and they go home, and he's not only is the guard baptized and becomes a Christian, but the rest of the family as well. Paul and Silas are not superhuman beings. They are simply Christians that truly have faith. They are living out what Paul said in this passage. Do not let yourself be intimidated by anything. Okay, the next passage I want to look at is Philippians 1 and verse 28, and I should have called that. This relates to what we just looked at. And not letting yourself be intimidated in anything by your opponents, which is a sign of destruction to them. This is something I think we can take great comfort from. What is going on when someone opposes us as a Christian? Whether it's someone with different views and they're having a go at us because we believe in baptism or whatever it is. What is going on? Notice he says, do not let yourself be intimidated anyway by your opponents, and this intimidation which they are trying to put on you is a sign of destruction to them. It's not bad as far as you are concerned. That's the point he's making here. When that happens, it's bad as far as they are concerned. Not you. You shouldn't feel bad because someone disagrees with you. I think possibly we should feel bad for not holding up our end of the beliefs. If we back out and keep quiet simply because we don't want to lose their friendship or we don't want to get in an argument, maybe we should feel bad about that. But we shouldn't feel bad if they oppose us, because this is a sign of their destruction. This is the sign that God is opposed to them. But to us, it's your salvation. If we've got the courage and the strength to stand up for God and be counted for our beliefs, that's a sign of our salvation. That's the sign we truly have faith in God. And we have a strong enough faith that we not allow ourselves to be intimidated by people who disagree with us. And he says, and this from God. Now I want to just kind of emphasize the fact that in general this intimidation can come to us only really because of people disagreeing with our views. And it seems like this should make it easier for us to function as Christians. I don't say it does, but it should. The early days, they would kill you for standing up for what's right. Today, they just disagree with you. They might look down on us. So it should be much easier for us to actually allow ourselves not to be intimidated. I know human nature is not the case, but I think this is one area we really need to work on. I think that's one of the reasons the church in New Zealand is strong. Because we're not willing to offend people, or we haven't learned to be able to talk to people without offending them. Maybe that's a better way of putting it. So we've kept quiet about our beliefs, and we've just allowed other people to rule roughshod spiritually over us. But I think it's really important that we don't. Okay, the last point I want to make is Philippians 1 verse 29. Because to you has been graciously granted on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer on behalf of him. Two kind of points I want to make here. Notice he says it's graciously granted on behalf of Christ. In other words, God has given us something. We've been granted something. And pretty much always when it's the idea of granted, it's the idea of given generously and for our benefit. I've given a definition there. I don't need to go over it again. The one grant, if you like, that we're given is obvious, to be able to believe in him. Second one, not quite so obvious, but this is summing up what's being said in this really entire passage. But also to suffer on behalf of him. Let's have a look at Acts. Maybe I better go to 1 Peter 4. I'll just miss Acts for the moment. 1 Peter 4. Dear friends, do not be surprised at the fiery ideal among you when it takes place to test you. Notice he says, don't be surprised that you're having to face difficulties and problems. And the reason we shouldn't be surprised is it's part and parcel of being a Christian. After all, Jesus received huge amount of opposition during his lifetime. Surely if there's anyone who should have got by without ever getting opposed, it was Jesus. He was standing absolutely for the truth. He never did anything wrong. But every way Jesus went, he received opposition. Don't be surprised as if something strange is happening to you. Our problem very often is we think when people oppose us, that's the strange thing. And yet Peter here is saying the strange thing is if you don't receive opposition. And if it's strange, it's outside the ordinary, it's outside the normal. Verse 13, but to the degree that you share in the suffering of Christ, rejoice, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice and be glad. If we've been willing to suffer during this life for Christ, we are absolutely entitled to rejoice in the life to come. If we've avoided the suffering and the strife in this life, then the rejoicing we may do in heaven is questionable for us. Now notice in verse 14, and I'll have to go very quickly, if you are reviled on account of the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests on you. And he says, by no means suffer as a murderer or a thief. In other words, we're not talking about suffering for doing wrong. If you're receiving suffering for doing wrong, you deserve it. if you're a murderer, a thief, whatever it is, you deserve suffering. That's not what we're talking about. Okay? Now, but if someone, in verse 16, but if someone suffers as a Christian, he must not be ashamed. And again, we very often do feel like there's something wrong with us. If we're being attacked over something, or someone's disagreeing with our beliefs, we to an extent, they try to force us to believe as if the problem is with us, but it's not. He says we should not be ashamed. Don't be ashamed of what you're doing. In fact, what he's saying is be proud of you standing for the truth. But instead of being ashamed, you must glorify God with his name. I'm unfortunately going to have to finish. That rest of it I would love to read. So that those who suffer according to the will of God must entrust their soul to a faithful Creator in doing good. And in James 1, consider it all joy, my brothers, when you encounter various trials. And then the last verse, which I want to really emphasize to finish off what I'm trying to say, is Romans 8 and verse 18. For I consider that the suffering of the present age are not worthy to be compared with the glory that is about to be revealed to us. Anything we might suffer in this life because of our faith, any efforts we might have to make so that we can live the faithful Christian life, is nothing compared with what we will gain in the life to come. The suffering of the present age are not worthy to be compared to the glory that is about to reveal to us. We are heading into the greatest reward, the greatest life we will ever possibly have in heaven. But this life is the proving ground. Are we worthy of that life? And we can only show we are worthy by the life that we lead as a Christian. Okay, we'll finish there.